keeping a good calendar, or using Google Calendar or planner of some sort, developing good habits will eventually lead to promising result. Something like a little catchy for you to write, but it doesn't really show like, in other words, I think, I believe, I strongly argue. No, you take that out and then you put down a more academic sounding, but with a little flair when you put there, leads to promising results, something like that. Because the reader knows once there is a style of your paragraph, you introduce the topic sentence, then you back it up with a citation. The following line, which is in other words, are usually yours. So the reader understands that. Why? Because of the typical convention of an academic essay. Once you say, okay, this is what Vijay Bhatia says, so in retrospect, or in essence, or in turn, la 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 would be your idea. So your idea is the part where the lecturer wants to see, and if you are critical, I'm sure if you understood the citation clearly, you would be able to give your own ideas, and that given time will show your creativity. Another last part where you can be creative is in the reflection. Always be honest in your reflections. So in the concluding section of your essay, which is normally the last paragraph, you summarize a little bit, right? And that's kind of boring, yes, but you want to highlight, highlights of this essay are la la la, and then you say, in essence, what? So that means that is your personal reflection on the matter. And that's where I think you can use I.
All right. So this is the last question. So how can we make a sentence longer and compact without committing repetition in writing essays?
That's a good question. Yeah. Repetitions are also another problem, I would say. This is because when we look across students' writings, we can detect that you do not have enough, probably not a range of vocabulary repertoire, because it shows that you don't know how to rephrase. You keep on using very high frequency, basic words, and that is normal for a student. I think that's very natural. So what you can do with rephrasing, and I don't mean to using the thesaurus. The thesaurus is quite dangerous. There's that one end. One end is where students, are very sincere. They are sincere with their lack of vocabulary, so they keep on reusing the same thing. That's very sincere at one end. And the other end is someone who's like, I want to do my best, and then suddenly use thesaurus, and then it sounds we call this malapropism. And we don't want that in writing, because it sounds like, why didn't you just use a very common word? So there's two ends of the spectrum that we're like, this one is too weak, this one is too bombastic. You need something just nice. And if you, back to your question, if you have a very long sentence, please be careful. If it's too windy, maybe my comment will be, can you deconstruct it and look whether it makes sense or not? Is it referring to the same subject or not? Oftentimes the students, are going very long, and the pronouns are all over the place. The pronoun it is now very confusing, because you began with something and then at the end it was a totally different thing. So to me, in that case, it should be broken up into two. But if you are very confident in writing a complex sentence, what you could do is, in the first part, be aware of the words that you choose, and then the second end, make sure you ask yourself, is there another word to substitute it, not using thesaurus. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Aisha. Now moving on. Aside from academic writing skills, students are also overwhelmed when it comes to their final year project. Questions such as, did I do it right? Why has my project always been rejected? What are the mistakes that I should avoid? So this kind of questions are always we keep asking ourselves. But fret not, all these questions will be answered in a while. Now, let's moving on to our second speaker, which is Dr. Shabibi Binti Turiman. She has numerous experiences in supervising undergraduates with their final year project and postgraduate students' thesis and dissertation since 2019. During her PhD studies, she represented UITM in Social Sciences and Humanities category in the 3-minute thesis competition at the national level in 2018. The idea is to explain her research in 3 minutes to non-academic audiences, which also means knowing what to include and summarize, capture the important aspects, and making sure it is comprehensible. The same can be said on writing about research. It's all about clarity and sound justification. Furthermore, she has written and published in Scopus Index journals, and her research work is generally related to applied linguistics and corpus linguistics. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Shamimi to deliver the talk.
Thank you very much, Dalia, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I hope you are still okay. I know it's not easy talking about I would consider a heavy topic, specifically academic writing and final year projects, right? But hopefully we will all, as Dalia mentioned, benefit from the content. And thank you for having me today. I'm glad to be able to share with you a few things, which I hope will assist you, right? Okay. I'm not sure about the background of the audience, but I'm assuming we have LG240 to, do we have, Dalia, if you know, do we have 241 or 242 students joining us this morning?
We have EPC students and also EIC students.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me just share my screen first. Okay, so mainly I'll be addressing issues related to writing up a final year project, right? Maybe those of you from the LG240 might not know me that well. Maybe some of you already, but I have been, because I've been teaching pragmatics, EPC 565 or EPC 499 during the intersession. Okay, but maybe those of you from the EIC or LG243 program will be more familiar with me since I'm teaching them, right? Okay, so let's begin with this with this image or diagram, right? So the issue here is, how do you get there in terms of writing your FYP? So I noticed some familiar names, especially those who are with me in my classes, be it research methodology or my other class, translation skills. Okay, I understand because a lot of the students have been discussing or talking about this issue on how difficult it is coping with research methodology as a subject, and on top of that, having to prepare the proposal at the end of the semester to be submitted. And the scary part is that the weightage of the proposal is 70%, right? So there's a lot. In other words, being able to produce a well-written research proposal will determine whether you will pass or fail the course, right? Okay, so, but today I will be talking about FYPs in general, which means we are already proceeding or moving on from proposal. I might need to remind myself about that and not really talking about preparing research proposal, but already about the final year project. Okay, so those of you who are in the midst of taking research methodology classes, you can consider this session as something to prep you with, right? So how do you move forward after submitting your FYP proposals? Okay. So how do you get there, okay, or how do you end up producing the final year project will be something that is both learned and earned. Okay, so along the way, you will experience rejections, comments, requests to edit, right, your work, this kind of things. Okay, so the topics that will be discussed today, okay, or given to me, would be common mistakes in writing FYP and what makes a good FYP, right? So in preparing the slides, I have you in mind, basing my content here on my previous experience supervising and also reading students' work. So before we start, okay, maybe we can just do something a bit interactive. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I will be pasting a Padlet link here in the chat box. Hopefully you'll be able to see it by now, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'll go to the Padlet link here to change tabs for a while. Just to get you to, were you able to, I mean, I hope you can respond to the question there, right? How would you describe writing your FYP in one word? For those of you who have not started writing your FYP, of course, this is something that is a bit quizzical, or it's something that you foresee, or what? How do you foresee writing your FYP? Yeah. Okay, let's have a few to comment or to just include your responses just to see numbers. Basically, I want to know how you view writing your FYPs. Do you view it positively or the other way around? Okay. Okay, any more? So we have challenging, some of you said hard, another person commented in the chat box, hard, mine challenging, time consuming, well, of course. Okay, any more responses? There are more or less 60 of you here. Perhaps we can, yeah, have more input from you or more feedback from you. Tiring, exhausting, right? Interesting, okay. Regret, okay. Okay, that's okay. Confusing, right? Interesting. Somebody said maybe it leads you to procrastinate, right? Okay. Any more before I go back to the slides? Okay, this is quite worrying, to be honest, but okay, if you are currently still preparing your final, your proposal or taking up ALS 560, I can completely relate. Okay, not surprising that we have all these remarks such as hard, mind challenging, tiring, exhausting, right? If we were to group these responses, I would say it's slanted towards negative feelings or emotions that you associate with that. Okay, I understand, okay, the struggle, but okay, if this may offer some comfort to you, I would say, of course, that is the process. It's a natural process, right? Come to think of it, like just like before you learned how to walk or run, okay, you will learn how to crawl, take baby steps, and maybe walk, but a bit wobbly, right? And then once you gain confidence, you can walk and run. So that analogy, or what we experience in life, this is only natural if we were to relate this to writing FYPs, okay, mainly because it's a process. Okay, it's a process where you will learn about your own strengths and weaknesses. It's a process where you will learn about how to get hang of writing academically, and particularly something that is very specific, which are the things that is related to the topic of your choice. Okay, always remember that with regards to FYPs, the topics chosen are your topics, or the topics that you have chosen yourselves. Okay, so that is, I guess, one of the most important things that you need to remember. Okay, I would encourage you to choose topics. We will go there, okay, but just as an early reminder, okay, just for you to consider topics to include as your FYP titles. That would be topics that you are happy to work on, right? Topics that you find easy to work with, is of your interest, right? Okay, so we'll begin with what makes a good FYP, in which here you can see the first point that I have here would be in terms of topic selection, right? Okay, one of the things, or one of the most important things that we need to consider here would be in terms of the time frame. Okay, so technically you have a year or less for you to produce the hardbound copy of the FYP at the end of your 6th semester. Okay, so with that in mind, you will then, okay, you are expected to also think about whether or not the topics are researchable, okay, or whether or not the topics are feasible for you. Okay, another thing is we are also talking about not just preparation of the research, but prior to that, okay, there's an important process that you would have to undergo, which is dealing with REC applications, or Research Ethics Committee of UiTM. Okay, so I understand that this is something that is quite new to all of us, even among the lecturers. Okay, so for information, it's not just students who have to apply for research ethics clearance before they proceed with their research, but this is also applicable on academic staff intending to research on something. Okay, so we as academic staff, we are also expected to apply for REC applications prior to conducting any research for that matter. Okay, so maybe those of you who are still in your 4th semester, you are not yet introduced to REC or what are the forms involved, okay, but this would be something that you will be talking about, right, towards the end of the semester, inshallah. Okay, but those of you who are already in your 5th semester, you have gone through the process of filling in the forms. I know that you understand how complicated it can be, right? But rest assured, you will always have your supervisors to assist you in this, right? Okay. So you need to remember, when we talk about applying for REC or applying for ethics clearance from the REC, okay, what's going to happen is that you will have to wait for the ethics approval or ethics exemption, right, before you can start collecting data. Okay, so if your application is going smoothly, then I guess, you can proceed with data collection 2 months after applying for REC. Okay, but if something goes wrong, then you will have to make corrections or amendments to your applications, and going back to REC, and then the REC will take some time for them to leave their feedback, and ding dong. So it will take a longer time for you to finally get the clearance for you to start data collection. Okay, right, which brings me to, right, so for example, let's look at these topics for first to consider. Okay, so these are actual research topics. Okay, so let's say your interest or you are interested in studying gender roles. Okay, so given the first topic in the blue box here, the title of the study is Understanding Gender Roles in the Workplace, a Qualitative Research Study. Okay, so this is a study by Michelle 2020. Okay, just based on the title, actually your audience can gauge what is it that the researcher is trying to research on or do in this research. Okay, so the implication would be for your FYP titles or topics, the topics should be clear and should be giving a gist on how would you as the researcher go about carrying out the research. Okay, so just from the topic here, we can understand, yes, it's a qualitative research study. So it's not surprising. As we read on, we understand that the research involves interviewing 12 female leaders' experiences with gender norms, implicit bias, and microaggressions that they have experienced over the course of their careers. Okay, and with that, 12 interview questions were asked. In other words, okay, for this particular research or this type of research, we talk about qualitative interviews or qualitative studies that involve interviewing. Okay, human beings will be involved. And therefore, okay, the type of REC application would be REC 2345. So that altogether, that means 2345, there will be 4 different forms that you are expected to fill in. Okay, 4 different forms, 4 different requirements, of course. There are different forms, so different requirements. Okay, that means AKA more work for you, right? So when you have more at hand, okay, that will probably lead to possibly, okay, you making blunders or accidentally filling the form wrongly, okay, and therefore that will make your applications experiencing some challenges, I guess. Okay, right. So maintaining the same interest on the research topic on gender roles. Okay, let's look at the other topic or the other research title in the pink box. The representation of gender roles in the media and analysis of gender discourse in Sex and the City movies. So this is a study by Cheng in 2012. Okay, so we understand here that this is a discourse analysis, okay, on gender roles portrayed in the movies Sex in the City 1 and 2. Okay, so the difference between the two topics here would be both are qualitative studies, okay, but one involves human beings and the other does not. Okay, in other words, if you go for topics like this in the pink box, okay, you will mainly be analyzing audiovisual data, specifically movies here, okay, or another way to go with gender roles, perhaps gender roles in the media. Specifically, you want to look at, I don't know, reports in the newspaper or how political leaders are reported. Those are still touching on the same issue or the same topic of interest, gender roles. Okay, but here you are only expected to fill in one REC form called REC 11. In other words, you are applying for ethics exemption. Okay, exemption means as soon as you get the clearance from REC UiTM, you can already start working with the data that you already accessible to you. Okay, another huge difference between these two topics is anything can happen with the potential interviewees with the topic. Okay, maybe you will have the interviewees identified, but any of them decide to withdraw at the very last minute. Okay, also we are talking about the current situation where it is almost not to say impossible, but there's a small possibility that you will be able to or allowed to conduct face-to-face interview, right? We also talk about the technical challenges of having or conducting interviews online, those kind of things, right? Okay, so not trying to discourage you here. Okay, but if we think of the feasibility and practicality and in the short time frame that you have, right, going for qualitative content analysis studies, just like the second topic here, would be to your advantage, okay, as compared to the earlier one. Okay, but of course, if you are up to the challenge, I would encourage you to go for topics like the one in the blue box. Okay, but I'm just sharing the reality here. Okay, comparing, because I already have semester 6 students doing FYP research but struggling. Okay, another thing that you need to remember is that as soon as you enter your 6th semester, if you do not progress with your FYP during your 5th semester, okay, you are only left with 1 semester in your semester 6, and that time you are actually undergoing your internship. Okay, so please consider that as well. Okay, it's not easy, okay, working or experiencing working life for the first time. Okay, albeit a short time, just 3 months of your internship, but okay, it has been a struggle trying to get my semester 6 students to get back to me with their full drafts. Okay, so these are some of the considerations that you need to think about, right? Especially in deciding of the, and also another reminder is that once you apply for the REC application, okay, or when you submit to REC, once you submit to REC, okay, you are no longer allowed to change topics. Okay, if you decide to change, that means sending another application, and you don't want that to happen, right? Okay, so yeah, okay. Oops. Okay, moving on to the second issue here. Okay, in what makes a good FYP would be verb tense. Okay, so Dr. Aisha previously has discussed on academic writing. Okay, so this would be one of the things that I find based on experience, right? If you see my first writing the FYP. Okay, in other words, a lot of students, out of convenience, because they were under the impression that, okay, the FYP would consist of 5 chapters, I'm done with the first 3, so what I'm gonna do is just to copy everything that I already have on the proposal and just, yeah, that's it. I just have to continue writing chapters 4 and 5. Okay, so technically, that is what you are expected to do. We don't expect you to rewrite the first 3 chapters just for the FYP, because of course the content would be similar. Okay, but despite sharing similar content between the proposal and the FYP, right, you need to ensure that the verb tense is being adhered to. Okay, because consistency of verb tense helps ensure smooth expression in your writing. So you need to remind yourselves that by the time you are writing your FYP, you have already completed the study. Okay, when you were writing your proposals earlier, you were still planning, okay, proposing the research or telling your readers, you submit your proposal, you are just explaining how do you plan to conduct the study. Okay, but when already writing the FYP, you are done. Okay, you have collected the data, you already have the data analyzed, you have the results with you already. Okay, so of course, you are expected to use past tense when describing your methodology and reporting the results. Okay, so this is one of the things that I find some students are still lacking in the skill of writing academically. And also being responsible as to what you include in your FYPs. Okay, so it involves a lot of consideration, especially if you decide to copy and paste. There's nothing wrong in that, because as I mentioned, of course, the content would be similar, but from planning how to do to reporting, Okay, so of course there will be changes in the verb tense used in both documents. Okay. All right, so for further reading, I've included a link for you to read on further. Okay, there are many sites, of course, that you can refer to, but I find this one to be easy to follow. Okay, so I'll be giving the a copy of to this slide for you to refer to later, right? Okay, so moving on to the next one would be, okay, a good FYP would be an FYP that is proofread. Okay, it's up to you. If you have extra money, if you decide to subcon, or if you decide to assign professional proofreaders to read your work and proofread on your behalf, there's no stopping you. Okay, but I don't think that is necessary. Okay, just telling you that there are outside. I'm sure maybe some of you here are proofreaders yourselves. Yeah. Okay, so you know that it has been a common practice for people to actually have a second eye or second pair of eye, okay, to read their work on their behalf. Okay, but I would suggest that you work on proofreading your own FYPs, because it's definitely worth taking the time, okay, to proofread your own writing. Okay, I understand sometimes it's very easy to miss, okay, errors or mistakes or whatever in your write-up, because you will be looking at the same thing over and over again. When we talk about the drafts, you will, maybe there would be a possibility that you will be working on the same chapter with many versions or drafts, right? So after some time, maybe you get tired of reading your own writing and then you say just can, right? But okay, if you were to proofread your own FYP, I suggest that number one, you look at the overall structure. Okay, please be reminded to, okay, cross-check the headings, especially the figures and tables, against the table of content. Okay, in other words, the table of content would be the most important pages that your readers or your supervisors or your evaluators will be looking at. Okay, because sometimes they are interested to, I mean, different people have different styles. So sometimes after reading your abstract, maybe the reviewer or the evaluator of your FYP, okay, would be interested to go straight to your results section. I don't know, maybe there is that possibility, okay, because different people have different styles of doing things. Okay, so if the results section was not mentioned based on the correct page number in the table of content, I guess that will be a turnoff, right? That already give a premonition that the reviewer is going to read a sloppy work. Okay, so you don't want that to happen, right? Especially if I'm not mistaken, you are also expected to prepare after the table of content a list of figures and list of tables. So make sure the headings or the captions and the numbering or the labeling of these figures and tables are correctly mentioned in both the document or the FYP as well as the list and the table of content. Okay, sometimes it can be a bit problematic, especially for those of you who are reporting your results in many tables. Okay, so when you mention based on table, for example, table 4.1, okay, so you don't want to make the readers struggle to confirming, just now it was mentioned that this was table 4.1. Why am I seeing another table 4.1 here, right? So that can be very confusing, and then you know that will be a reflection of the marks that you will get for your FYP. Right? Okay. Also, another aspect to be considered when you do proofreading would be in terms of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Okay, of course you can all, because I am sure most of us here, all of us here would be using Word document. Okay, so we can use, of course, okay, the word grammar checker. Okay, but as mentioned by Dr. Aisha, you don't want to depend on technology completely, right? So don't trust the word grammar checker 100%, because sometimes it can be funny. Okay, sometimes it could be mentioning that something is wrong when it's not, this kind of things, right? So you don't want to simply find and replace. Please be mindful when you decide on doing that, right? Okay. Another thing is to ensure, okay, whether you are using British or American spelling, the spelling convention. Okay, generally, I would say in the Malaysian context, Malaysian context of academic writing, okay, we use British English pronunciation, so that has to be really consistent. Okay, especially when involving letters such as S and Z, as in recognize. So is it recognized with the S or is it with the Z? Organization, is it with an S or Z? So these are some of the common words that I can think about, right? And commonly seen as written wrongly or inconsistently. Okay, so if you decide to adopt one spelling convention, please stick to it. Okay, but I would completely encourage you to stick to using the British English spelling convention throughout. Okay, all right. Okay, a good FYP, okay, is also able to produce a sound framework. So as early as your first chapter, okay, I guess, what framework that you are going to employ or use in your study should be mentioned. Okay, not really in detail, because you are expected to explain in further detail in chapter 2. Okay, but at least give a hint or give a gist of whose framework are you adopting or using for the purpose of conducting your research. So the theoretical framework introduces and describes the theory that explains why the research problem under. So having a framework or using a framework that you are confident with, it will help you to identify the key variables that influence the phenomenon of interest that is based on your topic. Okay, right? The framework or the theoretical framework will also highlight the need to examine how those key variables might differ and under what circumstances. In other words, how would the variables work in the context of your study? Okay, right. Let's look at an example. Perhaps I hope it's okay that I'm using something that is more culturally or interculturally related here. Okay, when we talk about cultural dimensions, maybe I'm not sure if you have this in the LG243 curriculum. Okay, but if you are studying, for example, intercultural, then perhaps these names would be familiar to you. Okay, so among the popular or known, okay, cultural dimensions would be Hofstede, Halls, okay, House et al, and we have Trompinars. Okay, so these would be the cultural dimensions that perhaps you will come across as you do your reading. Okay, because before you would want to prepare for your chapter 2 or your literature review, okay, basically you are reviewing literature. In other words, you will be reading a lot of things. So these will probably be some of the names that will come across, okay, as people who introduces different cultural dimensions. Okay, so let's look at a research example. Okay, in the left-hand side, we have this title. Okay, the title of the study is The Effects of Culture on International Advertising Appeals, a cross-cultural content analysis of US and Japanese global brands. Okay, so the title is, I guess, very clear there, okay, that it is a cross-cultural content analysis. Okay, and the overarching issue is investigating the effects of culture, okay, on international advertising appeals. Okay, so this research or this study actually looks at understanding cultural differences, because cultural differences is often considered a prerequisite for successful international advertising. So based on that understanding, the researcher is trying to study culture and how it has an effect, or how it impacts international advertising appeals. Okay, so in the end, the researcher decided to, out of the 4 cultural dimensions here, the researcher decides to adopt this or use this Hofstede's framework or cultural framework. Okay, because of these justification. Hofstede cultural dimension is considered as most influential. Okay, it's most often employed in research on advertising cultural implication. Okay, and the 2 justifications should be clearly mentioned as you write your as you explain on the theoretical framework in chapter 2. Okay, so you need to know how to explain further on your decision. Okay, there's nothing wrong in choosing. If you want to choose Hall, then by all means you can go ahead. If you want to choose the other 2 cultural dimensions, nobody will penalize you. You always have to remember, in research, there's no wrong or right. Okay, there's no wrong or right. Okay, but what differentiates between a good research and a not really good one would be how well whatever it is that is included in that piece of writing is well justified. As long as you have sound justifications on your decisions, on, in this case, which cultural dimension to use. Okay, so these justifications have to be included or mentioned when you decide to work on or decide to adopt or adapt one framework. Okay, so the implication would be not just choosing the theoretical framework, but that theoretical framework will also guide you in terms of your data analysis. Okay, because based on the framework chosen, you will then, because this is a content analysis, okay, if you see in the 3rd bullet here, each advertisement is coded into set categories based on Hofstede's framework. Okay, so the framework will help you. That is the reason why, okay, that you have chosen this particular framework, because you are going to use the different dimension to help you with coding your data. Okay, coding and categorizing your data into themes. So just giving you some idea. So if you are clear on how to why the framework has to be clearly mentioned in your FYP, then you will understand, because it's not just for the purpose of writing your chapter 2, but more than that. Okay, you also need it to help you with your chapter 4. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, so the 5th aspect that makes a good FYP is to have the research questions answered. Okay, you have to remember that, of course, among the first things that you are expected to do when preparing the proposal, or prepare the proposal, or any research for that matter, will have guiding questions or guiding research questions. So research questions, the purpose of having the research questions are to have them answered. Okay, so you need to present the results followed by a short explanation of the findings. Sometimes I find it a bit problematic because a lot of students take chapter 4 for granted, as in they merely report the findings and just reporting it, like, this is what I found. Okay, I found this and this. Okay, and that's it. Okay, it will be more comprehensive, okay, if you provide a short explanation of the findings, as in, okay, provide a systematic description of your results. Okay, how do you do that? Highlighting for the reader observations that are most relevant to the topic under investigation. Okay, so this would be something that you perhaps want to remind yourselves, okay, by having or presenting the results that you find most interesting, okay, or that you find very it's one of the most interesting findings. You can start with that order, of course. Okay, but what I normally suggest to my supervisors would be ordering your results section based on the RQs. Okay, so always have the results presented based on the order of the RQs. Okay, so you normally start with presenting the results based on the first RQ, followed by the second, and if you have a third one, then the third one will be last. Okay, but even when presenting based on that sequence, you can have the most interesting ones based on each of the questions. Okay, so another reminder here: use past tense when reporting your results. Okay, right. You need to focus on findings that are important and related to addressing the research problem. Okay, so normally what's going to happen in results or chapter 4, okay, would be if you have, for example, if it's a questionnaire or if it's an interview, okay, normally you will start the section with presenting the demographic background of the respondents. Okay, but if it's a content analysis, normally the students will have a short introduction and straightway begin with answering the research questions. So these are different patterns that we can see in different types of research, right? Okay. Okay, and also make sure that you discuss. Oh no, that's another section. Discussion is in chapter 5, right? Okay, so these are some suggestions, right? These are actually taken from the source of the thesis that I have referred to as an example. Okay, so if you look at the first one here, right, the author first presented the answer, the answer to the research question or the finding, the results. With regard to the individualism, collectivism dimension, this is based on Hofstede. Okay, this study shows that US advertisements tend to emphasize individualistic appeals, whereas Japanese advertisements are more likely to feature collectivism. Okay, so that is the result. Normally, this is what students do. Okay, this is what I found from my study, and then the student will move on to the next finding without explaining. Okay, so this would be something that you can add to your explanation by saying these findings are consistent with the notion that a culturally congruent appeal is more frequently employed in each country, and then you can cite. In other words, you are relating your study to another study that shares similar findings. Okay, right. So after seeing this, which chapter do you think is closely related to chapter 4? When you write your chapter 4, okay, you will depend on which chapter to help you in writing your chapter 4. Anyone? You can, if you don't want to unmute yourself, you can just type your answers in the chat box. Which chapter do you think will be most helpful to assist you? Yes, thank you, Nelly. Literature review, chapter 2, yes. Okay, because you have reviewed the literature, you have looked at previous studies with different findings or similar. I mean, at the point where you write your chapter 2, you do not know your results yet, right? And therefore, yeah, but coincidentally, if you find or if you have found something from your study which reiterates or which is consistent with whatever you have reviewed in chapter 2, by all means, cite them, put them here, include them. Okay, right. Another example, it is okay. As I said, nobody will penalize you if your finding is not similar, okay, with previous findings. Okay, but that would be very, very rare, I would say. Okay, it's just that sometimes especially if you are working with topics that we can consider inconclusive, Okay, that means different researchers have different results. Okay, you can still cite those studies that were found to be inconsistent. Okay, so it's not wrong to say, however, the finding of no relationship between X and Y, whatever the variable is, okay, was inconsistent with previous studies. And then you can put example. Okay, for example, bring back those studies, please cite the studies, okay, include the citations. Okay, then if you want to include a short description, a possible explanation for this is that you can include a short explanation, but don't overdo it. Okay, because you are expected to explain that further in chapter 5 when you do, or when you write up the discussion section, right? But here it's not wrong to say a possible explanation for this is that in the present study, or in this study, okay, the participants involved were ESL students in the Malaysian context. So ESL students in the Malaysian context is different than ESL students in other contexts where native speakers are available, for example, right? So whatever that you are responsible to whatever you are saying or writing, okay, and therefore you should know how to go about justifying your findings. Okay, so an example would be that. Okay, one of the things that we can say is, for example, ESL learners in situations or in contexts where native English speakers are available might be different than those in Malaysia, for example, right? Okay. Okay. Not sure if this is the last one. No, the second last one. Okay. A good FYP, okay, would follow your ITM or APB format. Okay, so this format already made available to you to ease your job. Okay, I already pasted the link here. This will bring you to, I can show you very quickly, to this Google Drive, but actually the link was obtained from the APB website. Okay, so if you go to the download tab, there's a drop down, and then I can't really remember, but if you go to the APB website, there's a drop down that says download. So if you click on that, you will find guidelines for academic project, and then click on that, it will bring you here. Okay, but alternatively, you can just use this link that I have attached. Okay, all right. Also, the page numbers. Okay, make sure the page numbers mentioned tally with the table of content. As I said, it can be really annoying. It can be really troublesome for the reviewers or for the examiners of your FYPs, okay, if the page numbers do not tally with what was mentioned in the table of content. Okay, you cannot take this for granted, because of course it's your work. In a heartbeat, you can say, I know my chapter 1 begins and ends at what page, right? I know my chapter 2 begins at page 15, for example, but your supervisors or your evaluators might not be familiar with what, or maybe your earlier drafts were different. And always remember that your supervisors have more than one student to evaluate, and it's not easy. Okay, right. Also, please adhere to the total number of words. Among the comments that we keep on seeing every end of the semester would be, okay, some students actually wrote more than they are expected to. Okay, so please don't be too ambitious. It can be a huge drawback on your side, where if you are writing more than what you're supposed to, your supervisors will definitely not be happy with that. Okay, and they will not appreciate the extra work that they have to do to read. Like, why should I be reading more of this particular student's work than the rest, right? So please make sure, okay, that you adhere to the total number of words. Okay. Okay, and the last one, a good FYP. Okay, this is something that was mentioned by Dr. Aisha, but I don't think it's wrong for me to reiterate or just to re-mention here. Couldn't emphasize further on how important it is, okay, for a good FYP to have citations or proper citations. Okay, so currently we are following the APA 7th edition. Another alternative site other than what was suggested by Dr. Aisha just now would be this one. Okay, so you can, I mean, it's up to you. Maybe at this point you already know other citation generators, but again, okay, do not rely on these citation generators 100% because you never know. Sometimes things can go wrong, right? If the system decides to be funny, then you might end so always have the manual with you. If I'm mistaken, the APA citation manual is made available online, or you can refer to any sites that have this, or you can go to the just to see if you can have any documents downloadable for you to really refer to the actual source. Okay, and also in terms of the consistency, make sure whatever that you have cited in text, okay, will be available in the reference list and vice versa. Okay, because some readers or some lecturers or some supervisors are particularly strict on this. Okay, where they will see, okay, was this, I mean, maybe sometimes they just want to confirm whatever you have mentioned after you have cited someone, like, I've never come across this name, for example. I want to check this person's work, for example. Okay, but if the citation, or if it is an in-text citation, but it was not mentioned in the reference list, and yeah, again, that will be a turn off as well, right? So you can be penalized for not producing a complete reference list. Okay, reference is one of the criteria for marking your FIPs. So please make sure that all citations are listed, and do not include in your reference list citations that you didn't cite, because this can be a bit problematic, especially when you decide to prepare the reference list at the very last minute. Okay, so what I would suggest is that whenever you bring in new citations, you can just copy and paste first in the reference list, just that you don't miss them. And when you are working with multiple drafts, so let's say this problem can be, I guess, experienced when you are writing your chapter 2, because of course chapter 2 would be one of the chapters that you'll be spending the longest time. Okay, so sometimes after drafts, after one draft to another, okay, you decide to remove some information, include a new one, or update the citation. So this can be confusing. Okay, so make sure while working, especially with chapters 1 and 2, you have the reference list prepared already, so you can cross-check. Okay, all right. So those are seven items or 7 points that I have included, okay, to talk about what makes a good FIP. Okay, so I hope based on these consideration, of course, the list of items that I have here is not, it's not it might not be just the things that you need to focus on, but I hope at least with the 7, and by holding on to these 7 tips or points, okay, I will assist you in preparing a good FIP. Okay. Okay, moving on to the next topic, which is common mistakes in writing FIP. Okay, so firstly, I will go chapter by chapter, right? Okay, so these are the common problematic parts that, based on experience, I find, okay, students tend to make mistakes. In terms of writing the research objectives or research questions, basically, the general understanding is that research questions are research objectives re-mentioned in the form of question. Okay, but sometimes students decide to go out of the ordinary, okay, and restructure the research objectives by producing a completely different research question than what was mentioned in the objectives. Okay, so let's try to limit our creativity here and just accept the fact that research questions would be research objectives re-mentioned in the form of questions. Okay, because sometimes if you decide to change too much then the research question might not encapsulate the actual meaning or the actual objective that you trying to convey. Okay, right. The next part would be definition of terms. So we all know, you all know this, okay, but sometimes it doesn't transpire or you didn't show your understanding on writing definition of terms. Okay, more often than not, we can see students able to write conceptual definitions. Conceptual definitions meaning dictionary definitions, or definition taken from other scholars, right? But it is really helpful, especially when explaining your variables, to be having operational definitions as well, as in how the variable there works for you in the context of your study. Okay, I'm going to take some examples from Dr. Aisha's slides just now, where she mentioned one of the thesis statements that we consider would be unclear would be young adults. Okay, according to who young adults is defined as maybe in terms of categorization of age will be maybe the age range will be quite huge, but how do you define young adults in your study? So maybe based on your scope and limitation, you would want to only include respondents aged, I don't know, 15 to 19. So if that is your decision, that has to be explicitly mentioned in your operational definition. Operational definition means how do you define young adults in the context of your study. Okay, how is that variable or whatever term that you decide to include in your study is defined within the scope of your study, because your definition of young adult might be different than another researcher's definition of young adult. How does that definition work for your study? So that I find sometimes is lacking in students' work. Okay, you are so tied up to wanting to define the term based on how other researchers have done it, but how does it work in your study? Okay, so that's what you have to be more specific about. Okay, in terms of problem statement. Okay, so problem statement has to be has to present a problem. Ideally, it will follow this structure. What is the ideal? What is the current situation? And what is the issue? So by following these 3 steps, by the end of the section or problem statement mentioned, the 3rd paragraph will then address the gap in the literature. Okay, because you first talk about the ideal, what's supposed to be. And then the second part will be, what is the current situation? What is it like now? And then the final part will be, so that is why I'm going to address this. So normally it will follow that steps, I would say. Okay. Sometimes it can be a problem also if you are unclear of your own research topics, or the research topic does not really present a problem. If there is no problem, then it will be difficult for you to be writing your problem statement. Okay, so make sure the problem is well identified and explained in problem statement. Okay, and another section would be differentiating between scope and limitation. What is scope? What is limitation? So this would be another part I find some students are lacking in, or not being able to show their understanding on differentiating between these 2 terms. Okay, so please have 2 separate sections to explain scope. Okay, the scope of the study is, okay, and then limitations. Okay, all right. So that would be chapter 1. Moving on to chapter 2. Okay, we're talking about literature review. As I mentioned, this will be the chapter that you will probably be spending most of your time with. Okay, even after you are done with your LS 560, you are done with the research proposal, but you cannot simply transfer literature review to your FYP. Sometimes you need to update the information, right? I would encourage you to include, of course, the recent citations. Okay, but there's an exception. If you are including, for example, theories, for example, you are working on speech acts, so there's no excuse for you not to cite or include Yule in your discussion. So, of course, Yule's theory is way back, Yule 1975? If not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but there's an exception when you are referring to theories. It's okay for you to refer to more dated ones. But okay, if I were to give a logical explanation, so you wanted to comment on the ESL learners' ability to communicate in English language. Okay, and then you relate this to the issue of unemployability, where a lot of students are not being employed due to the lack of communication skills in English. Okay, and then you mentioned something like, with regards to it was reported in various media platforms, okay, that one of the reasons that hinders graduates from securing any jobs in the job market is due to their lack of ability to communicate in English. Okay, right. And then you cite someone, for example, Azmi 2002. Okay, while it's not wrong to cite Azmi 2002, right? We are already in the year of 2021. Okay, and the issue of graduate employability is something that is discussed every year. It is a current issue or current subject, and therefore you are expected to be producing citations and data, okay, that is most current. So something that is most current should be current issues should be cited using citations that are current, okay, at least 5 years back. Okay, so depending on what part of the literature that you want to cite or include in your write-up, that will determine the year of citations. Okay, some other problems would be in terms of lack of synthesis, okay, or the most common issue that I found is in terms of writing literature review by producing sweeping conclusions. Like just based on one citation, you come up with a conclusion. That's considered a sweeping conclusion because you should make the conclusion comprehensive by referring to, of course, more than just one source for you to come up with something that is, I would say, strong justification. Okay, so you cannot simply decide on something to conclude just based on one study. Okay, I've also come across students' work in chapter 2 or in that particular section keep on using the same source or the same citation from the first paragraph until the last paragraph. Okay, so how is that a review of literature? Right? So your readers will be able to question that. When you do reviewing, that means you should include, as much as you can. Okay? So this would be a helpful question that you might want to ask yourself. Instead of just listing and summarizing research, do I assess them, discussing strengths and weaknesses? So please ask yourself, as you are writing your chapter 2, by answering this question, inshallah, okay, hopefully you will be able to produce a good synthesis of the literature, okay, and avoid sweeping conclusions. Okay, all right. Okay, for chapter 3, of course, it will be the research design, the data collection procedures, and the data analysis. Okay, what I find problematic for some would be differentiating between these terms. For someone, I wouldn't say too experienced, but a little bit more experienced than you. For us, I think we could see this clearly. Like research design is this, but I understand you are, especially for those of you who are in your fourth semester, these are new terms or new things introduced to you. Okay, but by the time you are writing your FYP, you should already be able to differentiate between these terms, or of course, this will be written in different subheadings, right? You begin with the research design. So research design meaning, is your research qualitative? Is it quantitative? Or is it mixed methods? So that's the research design. And even when you talk about qualitative research, is it qualitative interview or is it qualitative content analysis? Right. Okay. So in terms of data collection procedures, you need to explain how do you collect the data step by step. Okay. So if, for example, you decide to, let's use the Sex in the City content analysis gender roles is now that topic. Okay. You need to have a justification on how did you end up deciding on that particular movie. So that is one of the things that you need to do, especially when you are doing content analysis. It's not wrong focusing or working on one type of data, okay? But again, a good justification will help you. Okay, not just the reader, but you as the researcher, just to help you gain some confidence as to, okay, I'm doing or researching on this particular audiovisual or this particular media because of these reasons. And that will help you gain confidence in explaining more about your own research. Okay, so in terms of data analysis, you also need to explain how your data will be analyzed, or how, your FYP, right? Okay, how your data was analyzed. Okay, that means step by step, from transcribing, for example, if any transcription is involved. Okay, it involves coding and then grouping the codes into specific categories and then producing themes based on that. All these have to be mentioned very clearly, step by step. Okay, but these are some of the common areas that I think is very glaring. Yeah, so chapter 3, a lot of students were not able to produce good ones. Okay, next, chapter 4 would be reporting of the results. Okay, reporting of the results, I mentioned this in passing just now. A lot of students merely report their findings with no interpretation. So I have given you examples in the previous slide where we talk about a good FYP. Then you can refer to that slide. Okay, right. So I've also asked this question: which chapter is closely related to chapter 4? Okay, a lot of you figured that out. Chapter 2. Okay. Also, chapter 4, it can be really messed up and problematic and complicated if you don't have the tables and figures captioned well or labeled well. Okay, so please make sure you have that. Okay, chapter 5, finally, chapter 5, okay, you have discussion, conclusions, and recommendations for further research. These are the 3 important elements in FYP. Okay, but when writing the summary, you have conclusion. Yeah, in the conclusion, you have to include a summary of the research. Okay, but in the discussion section, okay, some students reiterate the results, like you re-mention what you have mentioned in chapter 4, when actually what you are expected to do is to discuss on your finding. Okay, and sometimes the discussions are superficial, as in it is not being based on, or it is not built upon other studies. Okay, it's just based on your own assumptions. Okay, so that is what is meant here by superficial. Okay, all right. The second common mistake in writing FYPs is beginning too late. Okay, some of you did mention in your response in the Padlet just now, procrastinate. Okay, maybe that is your avoidance strategy. It's too much for you to handle, and therefore, okay, I'm just gonna put this aside and just wait until the last minute, hoping that my creative juices will work. Ring a bell? Okay, so some tips. All right. I would suggest that you begin with data collection once you have received REC or ITM ethical clearance. Tak kisah whether it's exemption or approval. Either way, once you have received that letter from REC or ITM saying, okay, you can proceed with your research, please begin with data collection. Okay. All right. It is impossible to write well when you rush to finish up. We all know this. Okay. You'll make a lot of mistakes. You'll regret your decisions, right? At the end of the day, I will want to remind you that when you produce your hardbound of your FYP, it should be something that you need to be proud of. Like your name is there, and on top of that, you're jeopardizing the image of your supervisors. Okay, right. So please be fair to yourself. Okay, be fair to people who are willing to guide you, right? No amount of guidance will be enough if you don't want to help yourself. So help us help you. Okay, all right. Also work with the end in mind. The writing plan as suggested, 1 month writing plan as suggested by Dr. Aisha just now, I think is very practical. It's doable. You can adopt that. Okay, plan to submit full draft to your supervisor. Plan when to submit the full draft. Full draft meaning all the 5 chapters completed. Okay, it might not be a good one yet because it's a draft, but at least it's there. Rather than not having or just producing separate chapters, kan? Okay, just make sure that you find time. So I suggest at least 4 weeks before the submission date, you are already able to produce the first complete draft that includes all 5 chapters for your supervisors to look at. So you don't want to wait until the very last minute, because if it's a sloppy job or sloppy work, and then your supervisor will be leaving all sorts of comments, and then you, in the end, you'll be disheartened, like, I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, so you don't want that to happen. It's better to receive early feedback rather than waiting until the last minute. Okay, because it can backfire. Okay, right? At the one hand, you want your supervisors to comment on your work. On the other hand, you are scared to read the feedback, okay? Knowing the amount of work that you have to do. Okay, so if the comments or feedback were given at least 4 weeks before submission date, you know you still have ample time for you to make corrections and to improve. Yeah. Okay. Finally, my final point will be in terms of coherence and cohesion. Okay. Please remember that chapters that you are writing in your FYP do not work in isolation. You need to know when to go back or when to refer to specific chapters when writing the FYP. Okay. For example, as you write chapter 1, it will give the reader some ideas on chapter 2. Okay, because I mentioned the framework has to be mentioned in passing in chapter 1, as you mentioned about the background of the study, as you introduce the study, right? Okay. At the same time, okay, also chapter 3, because when your readers read your research questions, they will predict, okay, so this is confirm a survey, for example, or this is qualitative interview, for example, right? Okay, so when you write chapter 2, of course, chapter 2 is connected, or how you arrange the sequence or the subheadings of the chapter 2 will be based on the background of the study, right? Or the important variables that you decide to include in your study. Okay, so that which means that a more deliberate review and synthesis of prior studies related to the research problem that you are trying to study will be explained further in chapter 2. Okay, but at the same time, when you review other people's research or studies, you look at how they have conducted the study. That will also influence your decision on how would you collect your data and how would you analyze it. Okay, so chapter 2, as you work on chapter 2, you also have your chapter 3 in mind, right? At the same time, as we mentioned just now, chapter 4, when you are writing your chapter 4, there's no reason for you not to go back to your chapter 2, because it will help you to relate the findings to the body of knowledge. That is what that is where you are placing your research, as in it is an expansion of previous studies being done, okay, because you have found something to top that up, okay, based on what you have studied in your research. Okay. Meanwhile, chapter 5 consolidates the whole paper. It's very important for you to not take chapter 5 for granted. Normally, this is what I've seen or I've observed, having students writing chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 very well. Okay, but chapter 5, it's a letdown. Okay, so that just shows that it's done perhaps last minute, or didn't get the chance to share that with the supervisor, right? So it's a waste of potential, right? Okay, and also use cohesive devices throughout. Dr. Aisha did mention on this as well, right? Show how the ideas presented are related to one another by using cohesive devices. Sometimes they were mentioned earlier in the text or reiterated. So you need to show the connection between the sentences, how this sentence makes sense, or how this idea newly presented but it's related to the earlier ones mentioned, those kind of things. Okay, right. So I guess that is all from me. I end my sharing with this quote: supposing is good, but finding out is better. Okay, so you don't want to assume. A lot of times you are expected to find out. Okay, so I applaud your effort in attending this session. This is one of your a good initiative of yours, I guess, to find clarity in maybe you are still groping in the dark, not knowing where to go or which direction to go to. Okay, but with these tips, I hope it will more or less assist you in finding focus. Okay, so the success of your FYP depends on the effort that you put into producing it, of course, right? So that is all from me. I open the session now for any questions or comments. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shamimi, for the informative sharing. I believe some of us never knew there was much more than grammar mistakes in writing a research paper. Now the Q&A session is open. The participants can ask questions to Dr. Shamimi in the chat box. Now, my question for you, Dr. Shamimi. So, when we are doing a research proposal, right, constructing a conceptual framework can be quite challenging for some students. So, therefore, do you have any strategy on how to construct a conceptual framework?
Okay, thank you. That is a common question, I guess, not just among the undergraduates, but even among the postgraduate students. Maybe Dr. Aisha can also help me here to top up any information that I'm sharing with you. Hopefully, it's not ajaran sesat or anything. Okay, basically, based on my understanding, I would say it's safe to say that when you produce conceptual framework, a conceptual framework will include or will capture the variables that you decide to include in your study. Okay, that is one. Of course, the conceptual framework will be built upon theoretical framework as well. Okay, but normally in conceptual framework, other than on the lines that you decide to include, okay, it could also be a combination of variables that are built upon different theories. So it can, when you say it's conceptual, it is actually being based on your study, okay? Because maybe previous study just include, for example, if I were to give an example, you're looking at the effects of group work on reading comprehension. Okay, that is common. Okay, but you decided to include another variable, that is reading motivation. And it's not just any motivation, it's very specific reading motivation. So you want to see how group work have an effect on ESL learners' reading comprehension and reading motivation. Okay, so in previous studies, or the common literature used would be theories on reading comprehension, okay, but you decide to include another variable, that is reading motivation, but you found out that in general, you have a lot of motivation theories. Okay, but here in your study, it's very specific that you want to look at reading motivation theories, or how you explain motivation in reading, defining it in the context of your research. So I guess going back to your question, Dalia, I would say knowing or understanding your variables first and knowing why you decide to include that to research on would be a determiner in building, okay, your conceptual framework. So basically, conceptual framework will it's a conceptualization of the variables or the things that you decide to include in your study. So maybe Dr. Aisha has something to add to that.
I guess, if I may, it's pretty much what Dr. Mimi has said. What I can tell you is students normally are conflicted between the two, but what you should know is that there's no force to have both at the same time, because it really depends on how you are going to conduct the study. Oftentimes we see a repetition of something that you learn from research methodology, because I can tell that these are just templates that you are using, and that doesn't show that you understand where you're going with your research. It just shows that you're merely copying a template that was supposed to be for one particular type of study. So for those who are doing a content analysis, should not follow the typical template that you saw in research methodology class, because that one is more quantitative via survey, I believe. With regard to conceptual and theoretical, just to give you a sense of difference, Dr. Mimi has said it quite accurately or aptly, because the theoretical is based on theories that you have followed, and these would be making your research more in deductive based. Deductive is top-down approach. I'm sure you are aware of that by now. And if you follow a particular theory, you're going to be using what is called a theoretical framework, because those are just the theories that ground your work. And so wherever you're going, you're going to go back. And based on that theories. So what you have is just a theoretical framework. It's just the name. But if you don't, and say you're doing a mixed approach, right, which is often the case with you all, I don't think that you should be trying your best to, hook things up and trying to fit into that table template, which really doesn't work for any of you. I find it very frustrating to have to change everyone's conception on the framework, because conceptual is where things get more creative for you, that works for you. So say, like Dr. Mimi said, the variables. If you have a part in your study that looks at gender, then what are some of the studies that have looked at gender and what have they used in terms of method? So that's where you say, okay, for that part of the variable, I'm going to look at studies A, B, and C. And then if you have like, oh, that was gender variable in, say, workplace discourse. So workplace discourse, okay, something comes to mind, maybe pragmatism, and that could include Janet Holmes. So you look at Janet Holmes and then what she has done, and then you have study D, E, and F. So then they merge, and then when you look at it from a bird's eye view, and you try to, sort of draw like a mind map or something, and this you can, work with your supervisor looking at how the framework can look like. It doesn't mean that there's one particular way, but definitely you are doing a conceptual theory, because that's how you're going to do the study. Conceptual theory, conceptual framework, and theoretical framework, they all show what design you are following in terms of the research, if I make any sense.
In other words, it doesn't mean that it is not, depending on what you are studying or the nature of your study, it doesn't mean that every research should have a conceptual framework. Okay, oftentimes for content analysis studies, theoretical framework will be sufficient. Okay, all right. Okay, any other questions? I hope that answers, Dalia. Okay,
Yes,
yes.
Doctor. So this is a question from future students who will be taking ALS 560 or will doing their FYP. So the question is, how narrow our topic for our FYP, since most students tend to be broad when it comes to finding their title for FYP.
That's a bit tricky to answer. I guess back to the question of how narrow, I guess there's no too narrow or too wide. I guess it's how you understand what you are trying to research on and having those scope identified. Because I don't think any topic is too narrow or too wide. If you ask me personally, okay, I think whatever the decision is, okay, that should be well explained, and as in, okay, this would be the things that I will be covering in my study, which are these, and those are the things that you will mention in the scope. At the same time, acknowledging any limitations that can come together with the research that you are studying. But when you say narrow or wide just now, Dalia, were you referring to the the title?
Yes. I mean the study that we're going to do.
Any comments, Natasha?
I think when it comes to topic, I always advise the students to come up with their research questions first, because that really shows how focused you are. Yes, there are times that you could go very broad or very narrowed. One reason is if the research question comes to a deadlock, then it would be like, oh, you already know the answer. Some of the questions are like yes or no questions, so that's very deadlock. Meaning, why are you asking that question? And so it does show that you already know the answer, and therefore the topic could be a little too narrow. However, I do think that working or brainstorming the topic specificity is a thing that you would do the first time, right? Discussing with your supervisor. So just like in the research proposal, you would be brainstorming, and I personally would have students come up with 3 chosen topics that would be followed by their own research questions, and then I get to choose based on what I feel is my strength to support you. So that's one of the style that perhaps the supervisor can give, and students should always be aware that the topic, in my view, should not be too narrow, too broad. It would be difficult later on in terms of analyzing it towards the end. I do have an example of a student that went to, I guess, too narrow or too closed in terms of data, because it was related to a research question. And then at the end of the day, we had to revise and kind of make the research question a bit more loose because it was too restricted. And so that's one example of where it didn't work.
Maybe a narrow research question, I guess, are easily identifiable answers. Like, why bother researching this when you already have the answer? So yeah.
All right. So the last question here is, how do you define an impactful final year project?
So far, I have not found one, to be honest. Okay. Oh, but Dr. Aisha has. Remember the student you told me about? Like
but fair enough. You all have to understand that Dr. Mimi and I, we just joined about like 3 to 4 years. So, asking that question would be a little biased compared to our more senior colleagues that may have had a lot more experience. So maybe there were really good ones in the past. I personally, if I can take this question, I would say that maybe it's important for you to know as well the quality is deteriorating. If I'm afraid to say, it's very sad. It's a difficult thing to say to all of you, but one of the reasons for the idea that came up with this workshop, I had a chance to speak to your advisor, is because the concern that we have seen throughout the past semesters in terms of quality, too much work on the supervisor side to look at the nitty gritty. It's like there are more and more students coming in. So the students who are not aware of the basic fundamentals will eventually add on to our own work on it, because it does seem like the supervisor had to do so much in order to change the FYP completely, which to me is sad, because if you had over the course of the 3-4 years of your learning, I want to see an FYP that I don't need to interfere as much. But truth be told, I have had to do a lot of changes to my FYP students, and they know who they are. And it shouldn't be like that. It gives us, just a worrying concern. To me, in the past, there was only, if I were to say that maybe one or two, there's always that one single, the standard of that semester. You would always have to grade, and so there would be the highest, which is the benchmark. And this high doesn't necessarily have to be an A, it could be a B, but it was the highest. So I would say, in terms of expectations, impactful, like you said, you could have one A student that is very hardworking. So this student I had was I was lucky to have received her when my first experience supervising an FYP. So that was back in, I guess, 2017, 2018. So she was open to my feedback. Like I said, I am very whoever works with me would understand that I follow the reverse timeline fortnightly strategy very religiously. So they would know, if you don't follow that, then I would not be giving you feedback. And they understand how valuable the feedbacks are. So this student was very on point, to the point that she could not have been given any more feedback because it was already perfect at that point. So we couldn't continue that, because she was really cooperative in terms of the turn taking, the turnover. So she had a really good A, and she actually presented at a conference. And I was glad that that actually led somewhere. When you mentioned impactful, that was giving her confidence, even though she was not pursuing academia anymore. But having her to have that much confidence based on the FYP to present at a conference, have people come over and ask about her own research, definitely shows that FYP is not a mere write-up. It could also give you more than that, depending on how much you put in. So like Dr. Mimi said, and it's true, once you reach internship, you're already like, I gotta do this, because this seems like a more immediate pressure, because obviously the boss is there and you're working 9 to 5. So with that, the FYP kind of went astray. So that's where I always think, if the student can plan very well, listen to instructions very well, they could actually enjoy having their FYP alongside their internship and actually balance the two. Otherwise, like maybe will go to prove that if you try to do one more than the other, obviously something will be at risk. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah. Moral of the story is, frequent supervision would definitely leave an impact. I'm not talking about impactful FYP, but what kind of other factors that will leave an impact on your FYP. One would definitely be frequent supervision. I don't think your supervisors will mind having you submit your drafts every fortnightly. As supervisors, I guess we are very I mean, we welcome any extra effort on part of the students, initiatives, not having to be reminded, because more often than not, it will be the supervisors chasing the students. Yeah, when are you going to submit? I'm concerned because it's already week 7, for example. I'm concerned because we are approaching the end of the semester, for example, and I have yet to see your drafts. Okay, so these are some of the disappointments, I would say. Okay, of course, because we are assigned with the roles as supervisors, so we are expected to deliver. So we expect the same from you. Playing the role as a student, for you to take initiatives, to initiate instead of being asked to. Okay?
I'd like to add on that when we talk about the fortnightly supervision, it's a lot better for you to do that rather than suddenly ask for our help at the last minute. That is really annoying. In fact, for me, if you know me, I would not allow for any feedback 2 weeks close to the deadline. And my students have been following that very closely. They're aware that after the 2 weeks is up, I won't be looking at that. And then if they look at the timeline, it is very fair because they will get enough meetings with me if they followed. So why is there any argument that, oh, only now I'm able to send it to you because I finished my internship? So that is for me is a lousy excuse. And number 2, maybe Dr. Nimi is quite generous with all of you, but for me, if you do not respond to the agreement that we made earlier in terms of fortnightly, and you do not try to make an effort to find me, I will not chase you. I can easily report a failure for you. I don't mind doing that. So the students are very aware, and they are, they are, because that is the logical kind of explanation. If you can't meet it, then what is your other excuse? Because I am waiting here for your work to be reviewed. I cannot review if I don't have anything to be read. So in this case, I am not at fault, and I am more willing to report on a failure for you because it's a lot easier than reading work that at the end of the day I know will not pass. And so that is very clear on my end. I hope students take this very seriously because the quality of your FYPs are not up to my standard. I think not for APB, and not at all for UITM, I guess. And this is going to be more scary if you decide to pursue your postgraduate, because if you continue your postgraduate and if your FYP was not really really great, then I would be a little scared for the postgraduate level. Yeah, I mean, I know this may not be really nice to hear, but this is the reality. And I guess thank you all for coming to face the truth, I guess, and wanting to know. You should just ask away, Dahlia. Anybody else? You shouldn't be too shy or worried if you have that burning question. This is the time, because Mimi and I were quite free now. Otherwise, we'd be very busy had it not been for an event like this. I wouldn't. I think personally, I wouldn't entertain your one question. But this is the time, I guess. If you have anything, please ask now. Otherwise, I would only be attentive to my students, supervisees.
Yeah, also not to scare you or anything, but failing your FYP, meaning having to repeat the whole semester just for the FYP when you can already go to work. So yeah.
For the record, I have failed 2 people. Now you have to understand, failures are part of life. The reason they are failed, they receive a failure is not because they could not do it, it's because they were not serious at the time that they were supposed to do it. So eventually they pass. But why? why do you have to go through that? It's because some people just have to learn it the hard way. And this is the truth about the millennials and future generation Z, because as you go to the working world, it's not going to be just, nice and dandy. It's not going to be everything is served on a platter for you. And you should not say or think that you are entitled, So I feel like I have to make some hard decisions. And yes, you can tell me if my decision was not very empathetic, but in the long run, you have to understand that if you do not take things seriously, and if you have to meet with further failures that are bigger than FYP, like losing a job, losing a loved one, or going bankrupt in the future, those can be very detrimental to your mental health being. So if you cannot take up a failed course, if you cannot react well to it, then I don't think you can face the real world. So either you buckle up or you show up. And any last questions? If that's all, I guess, Dahlia, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Shamimi and Dr. Aisha, for this wonderful insight about writing research papers. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have finally come to the end of this program. We would like to say thanks once again to all two speakers, Dr. Aisha and Dr. Shamimi, for their insightful sharing session. So, this concludes the program. Before we end, I would like everyone to turn on your camera for a photo shoot session. All right. Okay.
But then maybe you can share the poster again.
Oh,
I don't know.
Yeah. Adila?
I mean, that would be good. I like your backdrop. That's quite.
Thank you.
It's quite handy. Oh, if you share it, then you won't be able to see everyone. Is that why? Oh, I don't know.
Adila, is it okay?
It's up to you. How many are you from final year students here? Do you know the demographics?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. There may be, just freshies, and then they'll be peeing in their pants and probably suddenly trying to avoid. They'll be marking us for sure. I guess not Dr. Mimi so much, maybe me. So
why are these people telling us all these things?
Yeah, I know.
All right. So 1, 2, 3. So another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
We hope you have learned and enjoyed this program. Don't forget to take a screenshot of this event as a proof of your attendance. The attendance link will be given in the chat box, or already been given. Hopefully, this program has been fun and beneficial for everyone. So my name is Fatin Dahlia Putri. Thank you for attention. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Shamimi and Dr. Aisha.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the weekend, and selamat berpuasa. Bye.
Thank you, Dahlia.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
Dahlia.
Thank you, everyone.
Apples Committee.